have to, yeah, so recording is on. Now I open this whiteboard again, okay? And here, let's suppose I want to tell you about the different keys present in the database management system. So keys is basically identification of a particular record in a database table, right? So there are different types of keys, starting with the first one is super key, then comes candidate key, then comes primary key, then comes secondary key, then comes non key. Okay, don't type anything, don't put any annotation on this screen, please. So secondary key, non key, then comes to partial key. Before we understand partial key, we need to understand composite key, and singleton key. Okay, now partial key and discriminator. So these are the different concepts that is available in database: super key, candidate key, primary key, secondary key, non key, composite key, singleton key, and partial key. So if I talk about all these one by one, so here let me decrease the font, or can I? No, I can't. Anyway, so what this super key is all about, that can uniquely identify a tuple in a relation. So let's say there are in a relation there are some columns A, B, C, D, E. These are different columns. Let's say A means the name of a student, B is the roll number, C is the age, D is the, let's say, date of birth, and E is the specific, let's say, grade that he or she achieved in the last exam. So these are different column names. Now, out of these 5 columns, let's say ABC are the attributes which are basically able to uniquely identify a tuple in relation R. So this ABC, I will say that it is a super key, okay? Because this combination ABC can uniquely identify a tuple, means a record in a relation of this, the name of the relation is R, let's say. Now, if it is possible that out of these 3 different columns, only 2 columns can also uniquely identify the tuple in a relation. Let's say the minimal subset out of these 3 columns, the minimal subset is, let's say, A comma B. This is one set, and another set is, let's say, A comma C. So these 2 sets of columns or attributes that can also uniquely identify a tuple in a relation, and this is the minimal subset, means only A, only B, only C, if they are not eligible to uniquely identify a tuple in a relation, then they will not be called as candidate key. But in this example, let's say AB or AC, both of them are eligible to uniquely identify a tuple. That means uniquely identify a tuple. Okay. So if it can uniquely identify a tuple, then what happens? This is called a candidate key. Now, out of these 2 sets of candidate key, and there could be more than 2, let's say there would be 5, 6 number of candidate keys as well. So out of those candidate keys, the developer or the we can say programmer or DBA will choose one of the candidate key as primary one. and that will be called as primary key. So let's say in this example there are two candidate keys, out of which this A comma B, this set of attribute combinedly forms the primary key. So primary key is chosen by the developer or DBA or programmer. Okay, so these people basically choose one of the candidate key as a primary key. So then that particular set of attribute will be qualified as primary key. So remaining set of attributes which were candidate keys, they will be called as secondary key. So here secondary keys example is what? A comma C. So this is the example of secondary key. Why? Because that is left. That is left means AB is chosen as primary key by the developer or DBA or programmer. So the remaining set of attributes which are called as candidate key will be considered as secondary key. Now what about this non-key attribute? Non-key. Non-key attribute is something which we can say that does not participate in the formation of the key. So ABC participates in the formation of super key or candidate key or primary key. So D and E are remaining. So these D, E, they are known as non-key attribute set. Okay, so these are non-key. Non-key means the attributes which does not participate in the formation of key, they are called non-key. Now coming to the composite key. Composite key could be a secondary key, could be a primary key, it could be a candidate key, it could be a super key. Now generally the super keys are always a composite key. Means that is the superset of all attributes which are taking part in the formation of the key. So it is more obvious that super key always contains many number of attributes in its set, and that is why it is normally a composite key. Composite means a key that comes up with lot many number of attributes. So that is called composite key. At least more than one attribute must be there, then it is called a composite key. So example of composite key is what? Example of composite key is let's say this one, the super key itself, A comma B comma C. This is one of the composite key. Then A, B, that is a candidate key, but it is a composite key because it contains more than one attribute. So all these are known as what? Composite keys. So these are the examples of composite key. Now what about the singleton key? In this particular example, let's say we don't have any singleton key. Singleton key means a key which contains only a single attribute, only one, not more than that. Then it is called a singleton key. Now suppose there is an example, if I say if I okay, this is what? Nothing. Anyway, okay. So let's say this is an example of a table. And if I keep on drawing like this, so I'm giving an example of a table where we have several attributes on the top. Let's say here we have uh, A and some other attribute. A1 is here, here there is B, here there is D, here there is P and Q. So these are different attributes in this particular relation. Let's say this is R1. So R1 is the relation where A1 is the attribute which is the primary key or candidate key. Now A1 is alone. That means A1, let's say A1 is what? Employee ID. So EMP ID is the primary key of this table, that is A1. So this is EMP ID and it is unique for every employee. So whatever records are there in this particular table, this employee ID will be identifying each particular row. Okay, so every row will be identified by this particular uh, what I say uh, primary key or employee ID. So employee ID is the only one key or attribute that is forming the key. So it is a singleton key. Singleton key means a key that contains a single element or single attribute, that is called a singleton key. So all of you, I hope, understand. And now the last point is what? The partial key. Partial key means part of a key. Now if the key can be divided into parts, then only it can have partial keys. Let's say the super key ABC that can be divided into parts. Let's say the candidate key AB that can be divided into two parts. The candidate key AC that can also be divided into two parts. So any part of these composite keys is called as partial key. So only the partial key is possible for a composite key, because composite key contains many attributes at a time, so that can be divided into parts. So partial key is only possible to exist in a composite key. So here ABC is the first example, and then this one, let's say AB is also an example, AC is also an example. These are the example where we can say that they are the composite key, and we can divide them into, and A separately, B, C separately, they are partial key. They separately are partial key. So these are example of partial key. Now coming to the discriminator part, when we have discussed about the weak entity set, there we have given an example that the dependents of an employee are having some name that is called D name, the dependent's name. Now if the employee leaves the office where he or she works, then his or her dependents will also cease to exist there in the database of that particular company, because dependents are getting medical benefits when the employee whose dependents they are, that employee is working in that particular company, then only the dependents will get the medical benefits. So the dependent's name is a kind of discriminator, because it cannot be used for uniquely identifying a particular record. They are only a part of the primary key of that weak entity. So when that is a part of a primary key, then it is not a full primary key or full candidate key. So it is called a discriminator, but somehow it can discriminate some values from the entire record set. So that is why it is synonymous to partial key. So discriminator is a partial key, but all partial keys are not discriminator. So this is a little doubtful concept, but you have to cope up with this for this particular discussion. But later, if I give some more example, then you can understand this clearly. But for the time being, just try to understand that all discriminators are partial key, but all partial keys are not discriminator. So with this, I would like to ask you about your doubts, okay, not only regarding this particular key concept, but also I would like to ask you any kind of uh, like any kind of doubts you have in DBMS. Okay, so I am just stop sharing.